It was supposed to be the suite reserved for him. Elias Vaughn's name was on the reservation. The penthouse keycard slipped into his hand by the distracted front desk clerk who barely looked up from her monitor. "Room 1306, she said, smiling politely before calling for the next guest. Elias didn't question it. His head was spinning from too many champagne toasts, his body aching from the weight of his tuxedo and the suffocating laughter of a wedding he had no desire to attend. He had shown up because Nolan, his oldest friend, had begged him to. After the whole debacle with Elise, the broken engagement, the tabloid rumors about betrayal and fraud, and heartless billionaires, Nolan thought maybe one night out would do Elias some good. So he showed up, he drank, he danced for 5 seconds, he smiled at cameras he hated. And then he left early, drunk enough to forget his past, but not quite drunk enough to ignore the gnawing emptiness inside. The elevator dinged. The hallway carpet felt too soft beneath his shoes. He paused briefly outside room 1306, rubbing his temples, then tapped the card. A green light blinked. The door clicked open. Darkness, cool air, a faint sob. Elias blinked. At first, he thought he imagined it. Maybe the wine had gone to his head harder than he expected. But no, the sound was real. Someone was crying. Not the loud kind, not hysterical. It was the quiet, almost apologetic sort of crying. The kind that came from someone who didn't want to be heard. He stepped inside, instinctively pressing the door closed behind him. The room was dim, the curtains half drawn. A single lamp near the bed was on, casting a soft gold hue across the sheets. And there, curled near the edge of the bed, was a girl. No, a woman, young, small, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was trying to disappear. Her shoulders trembled, her face was buried in the pillow. Elias froze. He had no idea who she was. Had someone from the wedding sent her here? No, that was not Nolan's style. Was she in the wrong room, or was he? He cleared his throat gently. She didn't look up, but her body stiffened. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I think there's been a mistake." Now she moved, slowly, lifting her head. Her eyes were red, her cheeks damp. "This isn't your room," she whispered, voice raw. "I know," Elias replied, stepping back slightly. "I think I was given the wrong key. I'm supposed to be in. I don't even remember anymore. 16-something. Her stare lingered, guarded and tired. "You should leave." "I will," he said, but he didn't move. Because for some reason, looking at her, this stranger in a hotel bed, crying like the world had ended, Elias felt something in his chest shift. He had known heartbreak. He had known betrayal. But this was different. This was quiet pain. He didn't know her name. But he recognized the feeling in her eyes. Loneliness. And that was the moment Elias Vaughn, billionaire recluse, and supposed genius, forgot about his keycard, his suite, and even the fact that he was a stranger in the wrong room. Because something told him he was exactly where he was meant to be. Sophie Lane hadn't expected to see anyone that night, much less a strange man standing in the doorway of her hotel room. Her mind was still foggy from everything that had happened earlier. The disastrous family dinner, the forced engagement proposal from a family friend more than twice her age, her parents calling her ungrateful when she refused, and then the flight to the resort booked with the last of her savings just to escape. She wanted quiet. She wanted space to cry without being told she was being dramatic. She never imagined she'd be interrupted. especially not by him. Tall, dressed in an expensive suit, disheveled but painfully handsome, his expression unreadable, eyes dark and searching. When he first entered, her instincts screamed at her to run, to scream, to call the front desk. But there was something off. He didn't look like a threat. He looked tired, lost. She told him to leave. He said he would. But then he didn't. Instead, he sat down on the floor by the wall, as if he had nowhere else to go, as if the silence she had built around herself had called to him. Minutes passed. Sophie's tears slowed, then stopped. The weight in her chest remained, but something about his stillness made it easier to breathe. Eventually she asked, "Who are you?" He looked at her, really looked, then replied, "Nobody that matters tonight." She should have asked more. She should have demanded a name, credentials, a reason. But instead she sat up slowly and wrapped the blanket tighter around her frame. "You always walk into strangers' rooms?" she asked. "Only when they're crying," he said. "You looked like I felt." "I guess I stayed," she scoffed, but without venom. "That's a terrible reason." "It is," he agreed. Silence returned, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was tentative, curious. She asked why he was in the resort. He said he had attended a wedding. She asked if he was drunk. He said only slightly. Then asked if she was okay. Not really, she admitted. And then slowly, word by word, they began to talk about families that didn't listen, about being pushed toward futures they never wanted, about feeling trapped inside someone else's dream. It was strange how easy it was to talk to him, stranger still how safe she felt. Somewhere between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., the vulnerability turned to something else. A glance that lingered, a brush of her fingers against his when he handed her a glass of water. The shift in the air, heavy with the kind of tension that made her heart pound for reasons unrelated to fear. He stood, meaning to leave. She stood too, their eyes locked. He hesitated, so did she. "You don't have to stay," she said, "but I won't stop you if you do." He whispered her name. Sophie, as if memorizing it, and then carefully, respectfully, he reached out to cup her cheek. She didn't flinch. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. When their lips met, it wasn't reckless or urgent. It was soft, full of unsaid apologies and shared loneliness. What followed was not passion. It was surrender. Two broken people finding something close to comfort in the warmth of another. No promises, no names beyond firsts, no expectations, just one night. When she woke up, he was gone. A note on the nightstand in neat handwriting read, "You don't owe me anything. Thank you for the silence." Sophie stared at it for a long time, not sure why her chest ached, not sure why it felt like a part of her had left with him. She didn't know his full name. She didn't even know which room he was actually supposed to be in. But she remembered the way he looked at her, as if for a few hours she wasn't just someone broken, she was someone seen. 3 months later, Sophie sat in a quiet clinic, staring at the ultrasound screen in stunned silence. The air felt thick, almost unreal. The sound of her own heartbeat echoed louder than the beeping machines around her. The doctor, a kind woman with soft eyes, gently pointed at the screen again. "They're healthy. Heartbeats are strong. All 3. Sophie swallowed hard. 3, she whispered. "Yes," the doctor confirmed. "You're carrying triplets." That word echoed like thunder in her mind. Triplets. 3 babies, 1 night, 1 man, a stranger. She felt the blood drain from her face. The doctor touched her arm. "Do you need a moment?" Sophie nodded wordlessly. When the doctor stepped out, she looked back at the screen. 3 tiny flickering heartbeats, 3 lives. And all she could think was, I don't even know his last name. She had tried to forget him. After that night, she told herself it was a moment of weakness, that it would fade like a dream. But it hadn't. Not when she woke up crying 2 nights in a row. Not when she kept the note he left hidden in her journal. Not when her body began to change and her nausea wouldn't stop. She hadn't been with anyone else. There was no other possibility. She carried his children, but he didn't know. And she didn't know how to find him. All she had was his first name, Elias, and a memory of his eyes, deep, quiet, sad. That same week, in another part of the city, Elias Vaughn sat in the back seat of his car, scrolling mindlessly through news updates on his phone. His driver talked softly on the radio. Elias wasn't listening. He just needed the noise. Anything to drown out the silence of his own thoughts. Then something caught his eye, a small article buried at the bottom of a lifestyle section. Local woman pregnant with triplets declines to reveal identity of the father. He almost skipped it, but then he saw the photo, Sophie, standing in front of a clinic building, dressed simply, her hand resting on her lower belly. She was looking down, not at the camera, her face caught in a moment of contemplation. His chest tightened. Elias leaned closer to the screen, zoomed in, stared at her features. It couldn't be, could it? A sudden pull in his gut said yes. The timing lined up. The face was unmistakable. And the babies, 3 of them, triplets. A memory came rushing back. Her face half lit by the lamp in that dark room. The soft way she said his name. The way she looked like she was unraveling and somehow still holding herself together. Elias gripped his phone tightly. "Turn around," he told his driver. "Sir, the hospital on 3rd. Now, for the first time in months, Elias felt something real. Fear, guilt, hope, all tangled into one overwhelming wave. He needed to know. If she didn't want him involved, he would respect it. But if those children were his, he couldn't walk away. Not again. Not this time. Sophie returned home that evening and sat by the window, her hands cradling her belly. She hadn't told anyone, not her sister, not her friends. She didn't want advice. She didn't want pity. She needed time to think, to breathe. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door slowly. Her heart stopped. Elias stood there. Same eyes, same stillness. But this time he looked more afraid than she did. "Hi," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Sophie didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared. "Can I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside, still in shock. When the door closed behind them, Elias turned to face her. "I saw the article," he said. "I didn't know how to reach you. I didn't even know your last name. But I saw your face, and I remembered." She blinked rapidly, her breath shaking. "You remember everything," he said. "I didn't think that night meant anything. I thought it was just pain numbed, but it stayed with me." Sophie looked down. "I didn't plan this. I know. I don't even know who you are," she whispered. "Elias Vaughn," he said quietly. "I run a tech firm. I'm not exactly known for being good with people." "A billionaire," she said bitterly, almost laughing. "Of course." He didn't smile. "I don't care about that. I just care about you. And the babies, if they're mine." "They are," she interrupted. "There's no one else. It was only that night." Elias took a deep breath. "Then I want to help." She looked at him sharply. Help how you'll send checks, hire a nanny, put us in a penthouse, and call it charity. No, he said, I want to be involved. I want to do what's right. But I won't force myself into your life if you don't want me there. And if I say no, I'll still make sure you have everything you need, but I'll stay away. Sophie stared at him for a long time. The wind rustled the curtains behind them, 3 lives growing inside her, one man standing in front of her, offering a choice. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel alone. The next morning, Sophie stood barefoot in the kitchen of her small apartment, boiling water for tea, with one hand on her lower back, and the other gently resting on her growing belly. She had barely slept. The knock at her door last night still echoed in her mind, the way Elias had looked at her. Not with pity, not with obligation, but with something that frightened her more than both intent. She had expected him to disappear like a mirage like that. Night had been a fluke of emotion and bad timing. Instead, he came back, and now everything was tangled. She looked at the mug in her hand and whispered under her breath, "What do I do now?" She didn't have to wait long for the question to find its way to reality. That afternoon, Elias called. She had not given him her number, but of course, someone like him could find anything. His voice was steady but careful, as if stepping across glass. He asked if she would meet him again. She said yes against her better judgment. They sat across from each other at a quiet garden cafe the next day. He wore a dark sweater, simple jeans, and still looked like he belonged on the cover of a finance magazine. She wore the one maternity dress she felt confident in her hand, always half shielding her stomach as though it might deflect the weight of reality. Pressing against her chest, "I've been thinking about how to help," Elias said without preamble. "Not just with money, though, that will be there no matter what, but practically, medical access, dietitians, a nursery setup, transport, around-the-clock support." Sophie listened quietly, trying to read between the lines. "And what do you want in return?" she asked softly. "Nothing," he said, "only to make sure you're safe." "And they're safe. Why?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Because they're mine. Because you matter," he said. That night wasn't just a mistake. It was real, even if it was brief. Even if we didn't know what it was. Sophie looked away, struggling to breathe evenly. "This doesn't mean we're a couple. We don't have to pretend to be anything. I know, and I'm not moving into some mansion just to be your responsibility." "I don't want you to be my responsibility," Elias said. "I want you to be supported. That's different." They sat in silence for a moment. Then he added, "What if I offered you a house on my property? It's separate. You'd have privacy, your own staff if you choose. No obligations, no cameras, just help when you need it." Sophie didn't answer right away, but her body was sore every day now. Her income had vanished when she left her job. The thought of walking up 3 flights of stairs every day carrying 3 babies terrified her. So she said yes, and 3 days later, she moved into the guest house behind the Vaughn estate. The place was quiet, sunlit with wooden floors and soft walls. Her room overlooked a small garden. Inside were fresh flowers, new furniture, untouched nursery setups, and an envelope with emergency contacts and round-the-clock staff schedules. It was overwhelming. Sophie spent the first week barely seeing Elias. He checked in once through a note left on her dining table. She wasn't sure if it was kindness or avoidance. She tried not to read into it, but late at night, when the lights were off and the walls felt too quiet, she wondered if she'd made a mistake. The distance between them, though polite, was heavy. They shared meals only once, a brief breakfast, where he asked how she was sleeping, and she asked if he had figured out baby names. He said no. She said she had a list, and then he left. Every time they crossed paths, it felt like stepping around a ghost. Elias was present, helpful, generous, but emotionally absent. He built cribs with the nursery team, but never asked to feel her belly. He ordered her vitamins, but never lingered to talk. Sophie tried not to care. She reminded herself this was a practical arrangement. But deep down, a small voice whispered something more. Something dangerous. You want him to choose you. You want him to stay without being asked. Then came the night it rained. Hard. She couldn't sleep. The twins were kicking the third baby, pressing against her ribs. She stood in the kitchen, rubbing her side, when she heard the knock. She opened the door and found Elias there, drenched, holding a bag of warm food and looking unsure. I couldn't sleep, he said. Thought you might be hungry. She didn't know what to say, so she stepped aside. He walked in, set the food down, looked around. I forgot how quiet it is here, he said, even with a storm. I hate storms, she admitted. They remind me of when I was a kid. I used to think thunder meant someone up there was angry. Elias glanced at her, something soft flickering in his eyes. Maybe it just means someone needs to be heard. They ate in silence. Halfway through, she laughed softly at a comment he made about baby monitors. He looked at her like it was the first time he had heard her laugh. You should do that more, he said. What laugh? She looked down. It's hard to find reasons lately. You're growing 3 humans, he said. That's a reason. She looked up at him, eyes glassy. Why are you really here tonight? He didn't answer right away. Then slowly he said, because I miss hearing your voice, and I don't know how to say that without messing everything up. Sophie stared at him, heart racing. Then stay, just for tonight. No expectations. Just sit with me. Elias sat beside her on the couch. They didn't touch, but the space between them wasn't empty. It was full of what-ifs, full of fear, full of quiet hope. And as the storm raged outside, they both stayed. Not as a couple, not yet, but as 2 people beginning to remember how it felt to be less alone. The mornings at the guest house began to change. Not in any grand dramatic way, but in quiet details Sophie never thought she would notice. A mug of her favorite tea appeared on the kitchen counter before she even stepped out of her room. A small note on the fridge reminded her to drink more water, or to walk 10 minutes after lunch. The nursery began to take shape, not just with furniture, but with the soft, lived-in feel of a space someone cared about. Elias was always gone before breakfast, but returned every evening around the same time, usually carrying something fresh, fruit books about parenting multiples, or once a stuffed elephant, with a note that simply read, for the one who kicks the hardest. Sophie never saw him place these things, but she felt his presence in every corner. He didn't hover, didn't try to control her space, but he was there, constant, quiet, dependable. She told herself it meant nothing, that it was just his way of coping. But part of her began to soften. One evening she walked into the nursery and found him sitting on the floor, surrounded by tiny onesies and a mess of baby socks. A look of pure confusion on his face. She leaned against the doorframe and smiled. Need help? He looked up, mock offended. I'm a genius, Sophie. I've built algorithms that can simulate global economies. I can figure out a baby drawer system. She stepped inside, lowering herself slowly onto the floor beside him. Then why are you putting the socks in the diaper bin? He looked down, then groaned. "Okay, I surrender." They spent the next hour organizing the nursery together. At some point their hands brushed as they both reached for the same blanket. Neither pulled away immediately. Instead, they paused, looked at each other. Sophie's breath hitched. Elias's gaze dropped to her lips just for a second before he pulled back and stood up. "I should go," he said. "Long day tomorrow." She nodded even though part of her wanted to say stay. The next day it happened again, not the touch but the lingering. They sat closer during meals, their conversations deepened. He asked about her childhood. She told him about the tree house she once hid in when her parents fought. He told her about a dog he had loved when he was 10, and how losing it made him stop getting attached to anything. She told him she was scared of being a mother. He told her he was terrified of being a father. The tension between them grew not in overt ways, but in the pauses. The way his hand sometimes hovered near hers. The way she caught him watching her from across the room. One night she found him asleep on the couch, a parenting book open on his chest. Glasses tilted at an angle. She stood there for a long time watching him, her hand resting on her belly. She had once thought he was cold, distant, unreachable. But now she saw the cracks, the softness he didn't show the world. She pulled a blanket over him and whispered, "Thank you for staying." He didn't wake, but his lips moved slightly as if replying in a dream. The next morning their fingers brushed again when passing the sugar. This time neither moved away, neither spoke. They just stood there, connected by something fragile. And slowly growing. Sophie knew better than to believe in perfect fairy tales. But she also knew what hope felt like. And in that moment, hope looked a lot like Elias Vaughn watching her across the table. Not with pity, not with responsibility, but with something dangerously close to affection. The shift happened so gradually, Sophie barely noticed it at first. The way Elias hesitated longer before entering the guest house. The way his replies turned shorter, more neutral. The quiet space between them, once filled with anticipation, now settled into something colder. She told herself it was just stress. The babies were coming soon. The doctors had warned her that triplets could arrive early. She had follow-up scans and weekly checkups and prenatal nutrition plans, so detailed they could rival military operations. Elias attended every appointment. He asked questions, took notes, held her coat. But he was no longer fully there. His eyes didn't stay on hers. His voice didn't soften the way it used to. She noticed it most when Daniel came to visit. Daniel was a friend from Sophie's old job, now a pediatrician at the city hospital. He had always looked out for her, protective in a way that made Sophie feel safe without feeling small. When he walked into the guest house with a bag of prenatal supplements and a warm hug, she lit up in a way she hadn't in days. Elias saw it. He arrived halfway through Daniel's visit, stepping into the living room with a file in his hand and an unreadable expression. Daniel smiled politely. "You must be Elias." Elias extended a hand. "I am." "And you are Dr. Daniel Hart, longtime friend." "Sophie used to help me with research papers back when she worked in accounting. She has a terrifying talent for correcting doctors." Sophie laughed, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Only when they deserve it." Elias's jaw clenched. "Good to know," he said flatly. The conversation carried on light and professional, but something simmered underneath. Elias stayed standing the entire time. When Daniel finally left, promising to return next week, With more supplements, Sophie turned to Elias, expecting him to make some sarcastic comment, but he said nothing. He just went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stared out the window. "You okay?" she asked. "Fine," he said. "Too fast, too sharp. You don't seem fine." He seems very familiar. Sophie blinked. "Daniel?" "Yes, the way you two laugh, the way he touches your shoulder. Do I need to be worried?" She stared at him, stunned. "Worried, Elias? You're not my boyfriend." He turned, eyes dark. "No, I'm just the father of your children, living in your backyard building cribs and paying for everything while another man walks in and acts like he belongs." The words hit like slaps. Sophie crossed her arms. "Don't do that. Don't turn this into something ugly. Daniel is a friend. He was there for me when no one else was." "Was I not there?" Elias snapped. "Every appointment, every night, every time you needed something, I showed up." "Yes, physically," Sophie shot back, "but not here, not really. You pulled away, Elias. You built this wall between us, and now you're angry someone else noticed me." Silence stretched between them, thick and aching. Elias looked away first. "I didn't mean to pull away," he said quietly. "I just got scared." "Of what?" "Of wanting something that could break me again." Sophie softened, but only slightly. "Then tell me. Don't just disappear. I can't read your silence, Elias. I'm already scared every day. Of giving birth too early. Of not knowing how to raise 3 kids. Of doing it alone." He looked at her, then really looked, and for a moment he almost said something, but he didn't. He just walked out. The door closed gently, but the silence it left behind felt violent. That night, Sophie lay awake in bed, one hand on her belly, the other wiping quiet tears from her cheeks. For the first time since he showed up at her door, she felt truly alone again. The next morning felt heavier than usual. Sophie's body was slower to move, her joints tighter, her breath shorter. She chalked it up to the stress of last night's argument. The emotional weight of silence still hanging in the air. Elias hadn't come by. No notes, no texts, just space. She made herself breakfast she didn't eat, then forced herself to fold baby clothes to distract her mind. But halfway through the second drawer, a sharp pain shot across her side, sudden and deep. She gasped and gripped the dresser, steadying herself. Then it came again, sharper, lower, curling like a knot. Something was wrong. Her vision blurred slightly, the room tilting in and out of focus. She pressed a hand against her belly. The babies were moving, but her body wasn't right. She reached for her phone, barely able to dial, then black. When Elias answered his phone, he didn't even hear the voice. He only heard panic. The nurse at the estate clinic had been alerted by the housekeeper when Sophie collapsed. She was unconscious when they found her on the floor of the nursery, one tiny sock still clenched in her hand. Elias drove faster than he ever had in his life. By the time he reached the private medical wing attached to his property, Sophie was already stabilized, hooked to monitors, IV lines feeding her fluids. Doctors moved around her, calm but focused. One of them turned to Elias as he burst through the doors. "She's conscious, weak but stable, mild placental bleeding. It could have been worse if it hadn't been caught quickly." Elias pushed past everyone and into the room. Sophie lay pale against the pillows, her eyes barely open. But when she saw him, something in her face broke. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't," he said, sitting beside her and grabbing her hand gently. "Don't apologize." "I should have told someone," she murmured. "I thought it was nothing." "You're not nothing," he said, voice shaking. "You're everything. You and them, her fingers curled into his. I didn't want to bother you. After last night. He shook his head, eyes filling. I was a coward. I let fear get louder than truth. I thought if I kept distance, I wouldn't get hurt again. But I saw you like that on the floor, and I couldn't breathe. A tear slipped down her cheek. I didn't know if I'd see you again. You will, he said. Every day, every morning, every night. I promise. The monitor beeped steadily beside them, a gentle rhythm matching the baby's heartbeats. Elias leaned closer, resting his forehead against the back of her hand. I don't know how to do this perfectly, but I want to try, not because I have to, because I want to. Because you're not just the mother of my children, you're the first person who ever made silence feel like home. Sophie closed her eyes, letting that truth sink into the hollow spaces she'd been carrying. I'm scared, Elias. Me too, he whispered, but we'll be scared together. Sophie's recovery took days. The doctors insisted she rest, monitored her vitals constantly, and adjusted her medications to reduce any risk of early labor. During that time, Elias never left. He stayed in the room next door, waking at every sound, appearing the moment she shifted or stirred. He brought her tea in the morning, read aloud from parenting books in the afternoon, and sat quietly in the evening when she didn't feel like talking. But even in the silence, things were different. There was no more pretending, no more distance, no more unspoken doubts wedged between them. One morning, Sophie found a stack of photos in a soft blue folder placed gently on her nightstand. Inside were printed pictures of every sonogram, every appointment, every blurry moment captured over the last 3 months. Attached was a handwritten note. I wasn't there for the beginning, but I want to remember everything, every heartbeat, every breath, every you. She pressed the note to her chest and cried quietly. Later that day, she asked him to sit beside her on the bed. Do you regret any of this? She asked. Not even a second, he said. Not even the fear. Especially the fear, he replied. Because it means it matters. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I never expected you to stay, but I'm glad you did. I didn't stay out of duty, Sophie. I stayed because this us feels like the only thing that makes sense anymore. A few weeks later, the baby's first birthday arrived. Not of life, but of presence of the day Sophie learned she was carrying them. It was a quiet day, no balloons, no crowd, just Elias Sophie a picnic blanket on the private garden lawn, and 3 tiny baby onesies folded neatly beside a chocolate cake. Elias excused himself for a moment and returned holding a leather-bound book. I made you something, he said. Inside were pages filled with notes, photos, little scribbled memories. Her first craving, the first time he felt one of the babies kick. The moment he overheard her singing to them when she thought he wasn't home. She turned the pages slowly, her fingers trembling. On the last page was a simple message written in his handwriting. I don't have a perfect past, but I want a future with you. If you say no, I'll still be here, changing diapers, washing bottles, being their dad. But if you say yes, I'll also be yours. Sophie stared at the words, then looked up. Elias was kneeling. No ring, no grand gesture, just him, hands slightly shaking, eyes unwavering. Will you let me be your partner? He asked, not just in raising them, in living, in growing, in healing. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand and placed it over her belly. One of the babies kicked. Elias exhaled, emotion flooding his face. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I want all of it. You, them, us. He kissed her then, slow, steady, a promise in the shape of a breath. And for the first time since that night in the dark hotel room, neither of them felt lost. They had found home not in a place, not in a plan, but in each other. The ceremony was nothing like what Sophie had imagined as a little girl. There were no grand cathedrals, no fountains of roses, no crowd of hundreds. Instead, it took place on the small grassy hill behind the guest house, under a wooden arch that Elias had helped build himself, draped in white linen and baby's breath. The sky was a soft pale blue cloud, slow and lazy overhead, and the sound of waves crashing in the distance echoed gently through the breeze. There were no bridesmaids or groomsmen, no flashbulbs, no journalists, just the people who mattered. 3 tiny babies in matching cream-colored onesies sat in a vintage stroller decorated with eucalyptus leaves and ivory ribbons. They giggled and babbled as the violinist began playing. Sophie wore a simple off-white dress that floated around her, her hair half up her smile, steady but soft. She walked barefoot down the short aisle, heart thudding not with nerves, but with peace. Elias stood at the end, dressed in a light gray suit. No tie, his eyes locked only on her. When their hands met, she felt a quiet electricity hum through her skin. The officiant, a friend of Elias's, who had once sworn he'd never see the day, began with a story. Not about love in general, but about 2 people who met by accident in the middle of their own storms. About how some homes are built in silence, and some vows are made long before the words are spoken. When it was time for them to speak, Elias surprised her. He pulled a small paper from his jacket pocket, unfolded it carefully, and cleared his throat. I spent most of my life believing love was a transaction. He said, voice steady but raw, that it required strategy, balance, something measurable. But then I met you, and nothing about you made sense to the life I had built. You were a mess that night, but so was I. And somehow, in that shared unraveling, I found the first piece of something real. I can't promise I'll always know the right words, but I will always show up. I will always protect you and them, and this quiet little life we've built. Not because I have to, but because I choose it every day. Sophie was crying before he finished. She didn't have anything written down. She just looked at him, her voice cracking but strong. You made me feel seen, she said. Not for what I could do, or how I looked, or what others expected of me, but for who I was in the worst moment of my life. I never believed someone could walk into my world and not try to fix me. But you didn't. You just stayed. And that's why I love you. Not because you saved me, but because you see me. Their vows were sealed with a kiss, so gentle and deep, the world around them seemed to still. When they turned toward the guests, 3 tiny claps erupted from the stroller, followed by a high-pitched giggle that made everyone laugh through their tears. The reception was equally simple. A few tables under strings of lights, homemade food from their favorite local spot, soft jazz humming from old speakers, and 3 sleepy babies being passed from lap to lap. Elias's best friend Nolan gave a toast. He raised a glass and said, "Who would have thought the most emotionally unavailable man I know meets a stranger in the wrong hotel room and ends up a husband and father of triplets? Life's wild." Laughter followed, but Elias only smiled at Sophie, their fingers interlaced beneath the table. That night, long after the last guest had gone and the babies had been tucked in, they stood barefoot in the grass, watching the lights sway in the breeze. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered. "Neither did I," he replied, "but I think we've earned it." She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "So what now?" He kissed the top of her head. "Now we build a future, one bottle at a time." 3 years later, the sound of tiny footsteps echoed through the backyard as 3 toddlers raced across the grass, chasing after bubbles that drifted lazily through the summer air. Elias knelt by the outdoor table, carefully flipping pancakes on a griddle, while one of the girls clung to his leg, giggling and babbling nonsense. Sophie stood by the kitchen window, watching the chaos with a fond smile as she stirred a pitcher of lemonade. The guest house had long since become their main home, expanded and reshaped with baby gates, corner cushions, and endless shelves of books and toys. The nursery had evolved into a wonderland of color and imagination, and Elias's once pristine office now had scribbles on the whiteboard in crayon and a stuffed bunny sitting on his chair. Life was not quiet anymore. It was loud and unpredictable and exhausting in the most beautiful ways. Sophie stepped outside her sundress, fluttering gently in the breeze as she handed Elias the lemonade. He took it with a grateful nod, wiping pancake batter from his hands onto a dish towel tucked into his belt loop. One of the boys tugged on her skirt, holding up a dandelion, as if presenting a rare treasure. "For you, Mama," he said proudly. She knelt to accept it, kissed his cheek, then watched him scamper back to his siblings. Elias joined her on the steps, their hands naturally finding each other's. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the 3 of them run and fall, and laugh and get back up. "Do you remember," Sophie began softly, "how this all started?" "A wrong key," Elias replied. "A dark room, and you crying into a pillow." She laughed. "You make it sound so romantic." "It was," he said, "not in the traditional way, but in the realest way I've ever known." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to think love had to arrive perfectly, that it came with certainty and sparkle and grand gestures. Instead," he murmured, "it showed up tired, broken, and lost. But it stayed." They watched as the kids attempted to stack rocks, declaring each new wobbling tower a castle. "They're so much like you," she said, focused, determined, endlessly curious. "They're like you too," he replied, kind, strong, unafraid to feel. The wind picked up slightly, brushing through the trees, carrying the soft sounds of laughter and birdsong. "Would you change anything?" she asked. "Even the mistakes?" Elias shook his head. "Every wrong turn brought me here. I wouldn't dare change the path." Sophie looked at him, eyes full. "Not even the night we didn't mean to stay." "Especially that night," he said, "because that's when I walked into the wrong room and found the right life." She blinked away tears, her heart too full for words. They sat there a while longer, side by side, watching their little family grow in the spaces between the past and the future. And as the sun began to set, painting the sky with colors no camera could ever capture, Sophie whispered the truth that had been living in her all along. Maybe love doesn't knock. Maybe it just walks into the wrong room and never leaves.